Inflation is almost unheard of today, but only a generation ago it was a major political issue. Have most Western governments done the right thing by reducing inflation, and are there any that stand out? With me today is David Seymour from the Frontier Center for Public Policy.
Hi.
So David, what is inflation?
Well, inflation is what happens when a government increases the amount of money circulating, but the amount of goods and services that people can buy stays the same. And the result is that it takes more dollars to buy the same things. Dramatically reduced inflation is a good news story in economic policy over the last 30 years.
How so?
Well, when Henry Hazlitt was writing economics in one lesson, he was contending with politicians who thought they could make people wealthier by printing more money. And many have learned that this is false, and now most governments actually aim to minimize inflation.
It's hard to see how such an obvious myth could have been so popular.
Well, in theory it is, but inflation has the political advantage that it makes some people better off in the short term, even if it harms the wider economy in the long run. So if a government funds a new service or a job scheme or a tax cut, for example, by printing money, the initial recipients of that money are clearly better off. But as soon as they spend it, they bid up the price of the goods that they're buying. The people they buy off then use the money to bid up further goods and so on, until all goods have raised in price and you reach a new equilibrium.
Right, but of course the closer you are to the start of the chain, the more your money buys.
Yeah, and that's why it's politically popular, but also economically unfair.
But if you see it as simply a way for governments to redistribute wealth, then where's the problem?
Well, the problem is that redistribution can be achieved in more transparent ways. Inflation causes a bunch of related costs which could best be described as collateral damage. The biggest problem is that it makes it hard for all people to plan ahead. For example, it's difficult to plan an investment if inflation is going to mess around with the future prices and therefore the return on the investment in unpredictable ways. The harder it is to plan, the harder it is to carry out ambitious projects into the future.
As bad as inflation sounds, you did mention that it's not a problem anymore. Why is it still worth discussing?
Well, partly because it proves that through sound policy thinking we can actually improve public policy. But politicians also have not entirely weaned themselves away from the mirage of inflation. In the United States, the Federal Reserve, the institution responsible for the money supply, still has the goal of creating maximum employment. The Fed still operates, at least in theory, under the mistaken assumption that the money supply can stimulate the economy and create jobs. As we have seen with previous examples, expanding the money supply, essentially printing money, does neither in the long term and on average. Inflation is less of an issue than it has been, but politicians still need to realize that they can't create wealth just by printing money.
To sum up the mirage of inflation, inflation does not create wealth, as the quantity of goods produced and consumed remains the same. Printing money makes people worse off, as it reduces the buying power. Stable prices have been one of the best economic policy advances over the last 30 years. In the next episode, we will discuss unions and wages. Can a good union really improve the average worker's conditions? Thank you for watching. I'm Jamie Stephenson for On the Other Hand.